enjoy a seat at the table and good company, where great conversations and meaningful discussions happen.
At the magazine?
No, Thank Foundation.
Oh.
Welcome to And Good Company. I'm Sarah Fiegelholtz. We all know that a great dinner party isn't really about the food. It's about the people seated around the table engaged in lively discussions. And Good Company gives you a seat at the table to enjoy smart and important conversations as they happen. I am very pleased to be in the company of Brad Little, the President and CEO of Community Foundation of Greater Fort Wayne. Welcome.
All right, thanks for having me, Sarah. Glad to be here.
Thank you. So you are really starting your third year, January.
Yes.
And by the third year, I think that's when you really start to hit your stride in an organization. And I know that you took a lot of time to do a listening tour, and you believe in this idea of a boots on the ground role. So I sort of want to know what you've learned in the last 2 years, and sort of how you're sort of taking your vision to execute for the Community Foundation as you hit this third year.
Okay. So clarification, this is my fourth year.
Oh,
so this was
okay.
my third anniversary. I'm beginning my
so
fourth
right,
year.
you're beginning your fourth.
Yeah,
right,
beginning my
right.
fourth year.
But I believe it takes you about 3 to hit that stride.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's why I think year one, the board of directors was really thoughtful in giving me a year just to get out into the community and to meet people and learn more about organizations, learn more about just how Fort Wayne and Allen County functions. So that was a great experience, and a couple of lessons learned. Fort Wayne is a great place, and we were talking earlier, and it's a great place in the sense that you can be as involved as you want to be or as not as involved as you
Right.
want to be, and if you really want to make a difference, you can, or if you really just want to support something and play a behind-the-scenes role, you can do that as well, and I think that's probably the beauty of a Fort Wayne, considering we're the second largest city
Right.
in the
It's
state.
what I say is the easiness and the accessibility
Yeah,
to do things.
and
Yeah.
as my wife and family and I drove around Fort Wayne during the interview process, we were just really impressed by that. And while it may sound cliched, we were impressed by the friendliness of the people, and everywhere we went, whether that be a restaurant or the parks or just being out in
Right.
the community and shopping and those sorts of things. And then really the heavy lift that everyone does, the businesses, the business leaders, the nonprofits, the community organizations, the school districts, and for us with 4 kids all in school, that was a really important factor.
And they were in critical, middle school
They were.
height,
So
right?
as we were in Iowa and had been in Iowa for almost 8 years, and so the schools were really important. Our daughter was just going to be a freshman, and then everything, the other 3 down from there. So the schools were really, really important. And what was surprising, I guess in a good way, and I don't mean that negatively, but it was just surprising, all of the school districts are outstanding in Allen County and even in the surrounding areas too. And so that was really a big factor for us coming here. And I will say now 3 years in, that has proven to be true over and over, all the districts.
So when you look at it, and you're really about this boots on the ground, one of the things that I think you need to get out and people don't necessarily really understand is, what is a community foundation and what does it do? So
Yeah.
tell me a little bit about, explain to me how it works and why it's important.
Okay. That is the most common asked question of all community foundations.
Right.
There are, so we'll only go big picture and then down. So there are about 700 or so community foundations across the country. And community foundations historically have been designed to do 2 things. And now there has been a third added recently. But the main things that they do is work with companies, organizations, and individuals to make their giving more impactful, more meaningful, and a legacy. So, and that we could go down that rabbit hole on endowments and permanency and those sorts of things. But by and large, community foundations are here to work with donors that want to give back to their community.
Okay.
And that piece is important because it really is geographical in their work. The second important piece that community foundations do is give grants to nonprofits. And generally, and I use this word loosely, effective nonprofits. So we do our research and our due diligence, and we make sure that the nonprofits are, in good standing with their state business. They're in good standing with the IRS. They have all of their articles of incorporation and their boards and all those kinds of things in place. And that's the due diligence and research we do. And so we give grants to those nonprofits. And some of those are done by those donors that I mentioned in number one.
Right.
And then others are done through funds that the community foundations have that are at the community foundation's discretion as to how they get out into the community. The more recent, and I say recent probably in the last 5 to 10 years, has been this third area that community foundations have really become important and playing a more important role is community leadership. So to your point about just being out in the community and learning, seeing, experiencing what is actually happening in the community. And so, it's easy, it's easy, as we all know, to sit behind our desk and crank out 8 hours a day and never leave the building, and you still have plenty of work left to do.
Right.
So that wasn't anyone's fault in the community foundation world. There was just plenty of things to do via the grant making and working with donors. And so this whole notion of getting out in the community has been, I'm embarrassed to say, a new concept. Because you would say, well, if community's in the name of your title and organization, it seems you should know what's going on in the community. So, but again, it's easy to fall into that trap of just being busy all the time. And so the piece, though, that's been fascinating about the community work is that it has opened all these other doors for us to be able to help in many ways. And a lot of times, Sarah, it's not just the funding. It's being the connector, the convener, the collaborator, because this more peripheral thing is being neutral, right? So we're not funded by any state or government dollars. We're not funded by monies that come in that have strings attached to them and all sorts of things.
Well,
so
some money does.
Some money does if it's a grant in particular.
Or if it's donor restricted.
Correct.
So
but by and large, when we're able to generally bring people together around a table that a lot of groups can't do just because of all the politics that are involved or all the other things that come into play. So that's essentially what we do. And then to answer the other part of your question is, we are funded, so that money is invested, and it's invested in, depending on the money and the purpose of the funds. There are all kinds of strategies around how we're invested, but by and large, the money is invested in portfolios, in the market.
And that's to create endowments.
Yeah.
And then you also, because when you map it out, and it is very complicated because you get the donor funds from people who donate money. And I was surprised that the average donation is $8,300. It's not a lot. I mean, when I thought about a big donor. So you have the donors, and then they can say to you, you can use this for whatever you want, or we want to create a fund and use it that way.
And and that's the challenge of the investment. So let's just take two families, the Smith family and the Jones family, and they both have $10,000.
Right.
So the Smith family wants to give that $10,000. They want to set up a fund and call it the Smith Family Foundation. The Jones want to set up a fund here, and they call it the Jones family. Well, the Smiths want to give that $10,000 out right away. The Jones family wants to put that $10,000 to make it last forever. So they want it in an endowment. Well, we have to make sure we invest that money so it's here for the long term. We also have to make sure the Smiths' $10,000 is available. If they come in tomorrow and say, you know what, we're giving the whole $10,000 to Joe Jordan and the Boys and Girls Club tomorrow, and we have to make sure those funds are available.
Right.
So it gets really, really complicated when you look at the Community Foundation, where we have 500 funds right now that make up our asset base.
I mean,
so it gets really, really
and then you have, challenging. You have but the other challenge, what I thought is the idea because if it's, if there's a family that gives a certain amount of money and they want it to go to educational programs, and then you had someone a couple that wanted to buy these expensive calculators, but you did research and realized it would be better if you got these Chromebooks.
Right.
So I thought that some of what you do is though you sort of pool the money, when you can. So you make it, I thought this was like the ultimate in collective resources and, like GoFundMe, because, the idea that, the 10,000 you give would only buy so many calculators, and maybe those aren't the right thing to buy. But if you can also pool like 10,000 from here and 10,000 from here, then you got 30,000, which you can also then give part of it and then invest part of it.
Yeah.
But why would somebody let's say my interest is in my Parkinson's, okay?
Okay.
So why would I not just, let's say there was a local Parkinson's organization or the national Parkinson's, why would I want to give my funds to the community foundation versus just giving it directly to the organization?
Well, and you can
Right.
give it directly to the organization. So the role the community foundation plays around donors is donor intent and what their long-term goals are with how they want to be philanthropic with the dollars that they have. So we are not a fit for everyone. And oftentimes, well, I find myself saying no more than we say yes, in the sense that if you already know and your family is already passionate about certain issues and those things, you don't need us to hand the check to the Parkinson's
Right.
Foundation. However, if your family is wanting to know more about education or disease and how they can more effectively invest those dollars and make grants and do things, then that's the role we can play in their giving. And if they have interest in a more permanent kind of view of what they would like their charitable dollars to
Right.
do. And so in that situation, oftentimes we're going to encourage you to just go give it to the Parkinson's, the local group that works
Okay.
with Parkinson's disease and those kinds of things.
Okay.
And back to your example about the Chromebooks versus the calculators, that is the value add that we bring to the
Right.
table, to say this family didn't necessarily know what was the right tactic, but strategically they know they wanted to help kids who didn't have access to those kinds of resources. And so that's where our team can step in and do the homework to say, well, I know we were thinking calculators, but actually the better approach might be Chromebooks, because here are some of the things that happen when those kids have all these tools
Right.
in their hands and how
Right.
they're used or not used. So, because there are many, many ways that a family can use their charitable dollars beyond a community foundation. And that can be a Fidelity account, a Vanguard account, their own financial institution. Colleges and universities are offering donor advised funds and endowments now.
Yes.
So our role is back to playing that connector out in the community. And if that's
Okay.
important to a donor or important to an organization, that's where we step in and fill that.
Okay.
So yeah, and we talk about that a lot. We're not for everybody.
Right.
And but when a donor or an individual or organization wants to be more thoughtful about how they'd like to do their giving, that's where we can step
Okay.
in and help.
And let's take a step back a second and
Yeah.
just talk about, explain to me sort of the difference between charity and philanthropy
Okay.
and how you see that in what you do.
So charity, and that's a great question. We have a great blog post about that too, if you want to go out to our website and check it out. So, charity is more that immediate kind of giving where it's something that tugs at your heartstring. It's something you might be really passionate about, and you just want to make an immediate gift. And impulse is probably the wrong word to use in there, but charitable giving and charity is really when you're at a fundraiser and you buy that foursome at the golf outing, or you buy the football
Okay.
that's been signed by whomever, or you're giving your regular annual support to a particular cause. Philanthropy is back to this more thoughtful approach to what we want to do with our charitable dollars, either as an individual or a family, how we're going to pass that on to our next generation, or how we want that legacy to look after we're long gone
Right.
from our community.
And isn't philanthropy also the approach that you're going to look at issues that within our community for a long-term view and to figure out why, instead of like if someone is hungry, okay, so the charity will help feed them.
Right.
But philanthropy wants to look at why do we have an issue of hunger and how can we fix that issue? Is that would be more?
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And when you think about philanthropists as they're being talked about now, and the larger foundations across the country and across the world, those are right. They're turning into more systemic issues, and how can we get
Right.
back to the root cause as opposed to the immediate impact of giving food to people in need.
Right.
And so how do we start back here on what put folks in poverty and made them vulnerable to begin with, while still addressing the immediate needs, because that's the boots on the ground piece.
Right.
Families have to be fed.
They have to be fed, right.
And clothed,
Yeah.
and have good health care and access to health care and all those kinds of things. I think that larger, more nebulous challenge that philanthropy has are these bigger systemic kind of things, and what role can charitable dollars and philanthropy play in that, and harnessing the research and the energy
Right.
and the resources to tackle some of these
And
things.
you mentioned sort of what your intent and focus is, but even there's a new movement, I think, or discussion with community foundations as well, is when you look to create endowment, and obviously you take the funds, you invest them, okay? So a lot of times you invest them in funds or Wall Street or bonds or what have you. And there's this issue now about investment in Main Street versus Wall Street, and sort of that hyper local investment. So that's a new thing also for community foundations, because I know that when I talk to you about what the community foundation and where it places its dollars, you know, you pointed out to me about when you sort of invest, not a grant and not a giving, like in certain downtown development projects.
Right.
The expectation is you are going to get a return on your investment. So talk about how that parlays and how you are utilizing that more or less, or what you think about that approach.
No, happy to, and that's a great question. So that has a term, it's called impact investing right now, and it's exactly what you just mentioned. It's the difference between the dollars that most of us are investing in Wall Street and money managers and portfolios, and the challenge that's been put to the field of foundations, not just community foundations, but foundations in general, is how about carving out a piece of that portfolio and using it to actually invest in your community. And invest, like you say, not a grant that's just going to never come back, but an actual investment. And there is risk to that, because as in any investment, it may not work out and it may not generate a return. But the field is embracing this more and more as a way to put some of the investable dollars out back into the community. So for us, it was Electric Works was a big investment, and the landing has been another big investment, and both of those have thankfully worked out and
So
will
do you think
grow our community.
So you know that the city has been very big in pushing these 4 quadrants and these programs in Southeast, and they just approved these projects. So unfortunately, the way it makes it sound is as if, and then they got some developers and architects to give ideas of what they would do in these 4 quadrants. And it made it sound like these are a done deal. Like, that, okay, we're going to do these. But the truth of it is that, yes, they are a focus for the city, but the city has to find a developer or investors or to do these types of projects or believe that they would be profitable. So because this is a big area of focus, not only the continued riverfront development, would that be an example of the type of Main Street investment that the Community Foundation might look at in terms of some of those types of initiatives or projects?
Potentially. I mean, that's the role. That's one of my roles as the president and CEO, is to be out in the community. You and I were talking before the cameras about just our role of being out and about and having your ears to the ground and eyes open, and I think that's where my role is, to be out and involved in those conversations as much as I can, and bring those back to the board as opportunities to make investments. And for us, it's vetting the partners. So on Electric Works and with the landing, it's been the Downtown Trust. And
and also the same developer, the Model Group of the landing, is now investing. Because there was a whole issue about the developers for Electric Works as an entity, but that's worked out. But I just meant that would be, because I think that people would be, because when I met you offline, I sort of pushed you on that because I really didn't understand. I was sort of like, well, is that the role of a community foundation, to be taking investment? But it does make sense, because when you think about it, that your role is also to take the funds that you are given, and hopefully, although there is some sense that maybe you should be put out of a job in a sense, because we shouldn't need, we should solve all these problems. But in terms of building an endowment or building the endowment of the nonprofits that you oversee, that it does make sense to keep that also, if you can, and you can get the return you need.
Yeah, and I think,
does that
all true? And keep in mind, these are dollars that the foundation has at their discretion. They're not donor dollars that are restricted, but these are the dollars that we have. Or if a donor wants to make an investment and be part of that. And so, that's why you're seeing community foundations being investors in solar farms, and
and this is a relatively
affordable.
New sort of this impact investing, right?
It is.
And is that what you mean by, you've said that this idea of that you can directly multiply the impact of each dollar invested, like when you do it through a community foundation? Is that what you mean, in a sense, by that? Like, because not only can you put some of that money into your grant making opportunities or scholarships, because you do give a lot of student scholarships,
Right.
but also because of this investment and endowment that then so it's sort of like I give one, but you can sort of, with your talent, and turn it into three? Is
Well,
that
it's
sort of?
and being an investor also allows us to utilize our reputation, our good standing in the community, and it allows us to also go have conversations with other potential investors or potential donors and say, join us, right? Join us in this investment. And so I think in that way, it turns $1 into $3, or it helps bring others back to talking about our role in the community as
Right.
convener, collaborator, connector,
Right.
sometimes funder, those sorts of things. And I think by making an investment in an opportunity in the community, kind of catches the attention of other potential funders, and
Right.
to say, hey, and so I take a lot of those phone calls too. Tell us why you invested in the landing, or tell us
Right.
why Electric Works is so important to the
Right.
Community Foundation, what we're doing, or tell us why the Women's Fund is such a big thing, and our Children's Health Collaborative, to
Right.
name a handful, or this Operation Vaccination that's now out there. And so for us, yes, it can, the potential to leverage our dollar with others that are out there. But on the other hand, sometimes it is up to a community foundation or a funder or another donor to kind of lead the charge too,
Right.
right? To turn into the
Right.
headwind and take on an initiative and run with it and see where it goes. And they don't always work out.
Right. So,
And-
okay. So let's just break this down a little bit, because when I was looking at all this, so you currently have 169 million in total assets, and you did do very well in your in 2009 you had 19. You gave 6.1 million in total grants, and you created 45 new funds. So, and that was the highest number that you've opened in the course of a year. Okay.
Yes.
So, when I was looking at all this, so you have certain funds, and there were some that I looked at the list. I wanted to know what the Hakuna Matata
Yeah,
Fund.
yes.
Okay. And then you have the C.C. Norton Fund for the care and comfort of dogs, and then you had the Nation Family Fund for advancement of hillbillies. So, in that case, are those funds would those be donor restricted? Obviously, I wanted to know, well, what's the advancement of hillbilly, or is that just a fund name, but then they put it in your discretionary?
No, those are donor-directed funds
Okay.
that are set up for a very specific
Okay, so how?
reason.
Because then you also have the 4 funds where you also offer competitive grants.
Right.
So those are already established that I know I can apply for. So that's the Knight
Right.
Foundation, the Barbara Burt, the Luminous Fund, and then you have the Clark Endowment, and you've got the Donald Wood and Darlene Richardson. So, but if I'm a nonprofit and I'm looking to come, those you have very detailed what the grant requirements are. But how do I, because you have is it 500 and something funds?
Yes, almost
Okay.
500,
So
481.
I was like, first of all, how do you keep track of all those? And second of all, how do I find out what is the Hakuna Matata Fund what are they looking to fund? Because I would then, maybe that's what I want to apply for. So how do I the big ones I get,
Right.
they're on there and everything. But how do I find out about these
Well,
little ones that I think are I want
So
to know
let's
about
start
those?
with your first question.
Okay.
How do we manage all of these
Okay, yeah,
funds? And
'cause I
so
mean-
we have an incredible team at the Community Foundation, and Heidi Lugwood is our chief operating officer, and she has a financial team that oversees these funds.
She's very busy.
And we have an investment committee
Right.
of investment professionals that help oversee our
Okay.
portfolio that meets regularly. We have a talented finance committee that then oversees our financials and how we're doing. So we've got governance all across the board,
Okay.
and an incredibly talented staff and accounting team that makes sure that we're keeping track of all these.
But
So
I
now let's go.
also meant the requirements, like the Hakuna Matata Fund.
Yeah, well, so now
versus
now we're going to go down to
Hillbillies
this
Fund.
next.
Yeah.
Now we're down
Okay.
to your next
All right.
question, which is the question about the funds, and that's where our Vice President of Nonprofit Excellence, Christine Meek, and our Vice President of Philanthropic Services, Allison Gerardo, come into play and work together.
Okay.
So Christine really oversees the grant making process, the due diligence that we do, the research we do on the nonprofits and our grants. Allison's the one, and her team, working with the donors, working with our nonprofits that have funds with us, and connecting all of those things together. So if there's interest in a particular fund,
Right.
I would start with either one of the, my suggestion would be you
Right.
start with either Christine or Allison, and then they can
But
walk you
wouldn't
through
it
that
also
process.
make sense, just how you have all the details about all of these competitive grant
Mm-hmm.
funds, like to have what the almost like a resource? to
Well,
see
that's
or
up to
no?
the family. The
Oh.
families really can decide whether
Okay.
they want their fund to be anonymous
Right,
or
they're-
whether they
right,
want their fund to
right.
be more public, and
But
so
some
that's
of
why.
these were great. I mean, I was like, I really want to
Yeah.
know what the Hakuna Matata
Well, and
was.
that's one where, you know, and if you're familiar with
From the Lion King, right?
and just
yeah,
the,
it's
you
like
know,
just to enjoy and
yeah, and this is a donor that just wants to make a difference in the community and kind of tongue-in-cheek created this
Right.
fund. And the beauty of this particular donor is you would never, you know, prejudging or however you want
Right.
to judge, but you would never guess the generosity of this
So
particular
would you
person.
then, as the community foundation, so let's say, because you're very also involved, one of your ambitions when you sort of created your new vision and strategy
Mm-hmm.
is this sense of community and connectivity and placemaking
Mm-hmm.
and making a quality place. So would that be an example where you would then be able to use those funds for part of that part to achieve part of your
Only if the donor,
only if the
donor
donor, and then,
agrees with that.
If the donors are still living,
Yeah.
then you could go back to them, right?
Right, which is also a new shift for us at least.
Right.
So every community foundation, you know, the saying in our field is you've seen one community foundation, you've seen one community foundation. Because our nearly 500 funds are a completely different mix than what you would go up to Steuben County and talk to Jennifer Danick and her crew and how they're put together. They may be heavily skewed towards scholarship funds and endowments. And you may go over to Kosciuszko and they've got a whole nother different
Right.
group of kind of funds. And we all may be, so that's the thing about community foundations. We could all be $100 million in assets, and that $100 million for all of us look totally different. So for us, so part of this 3-year journey that I've been on, and one of the things we decided early, Sarah, was to get to know our donors. So about 6 months in, Allison and I put a stake in the ground for our team to say, what would it look like to meet all of our living donors within 3 years? Now the pandemic has thrown a bit of a wrench in
Right.
that, but that's the march we're on right now, is to get to know our donors.
Because you have well, I guess you would have to say I don't know what's the term between active donors and then
Yeah, there's probably, I forget the number, just so don't hold, somewhere around 230 active
So
donors that are out
is
there to meet.
because what I also wanted to ask you is this: why is legacy important to people? Like, why is that to leave something? But also along those lines, are you seeing a shift now that people want to see, like they want to give money now and see what is done with it? You know, like to
Well,
enjoy it in a sense.
Yeah, so I want to put a bow on the first question,
Okay.
the question you asked me before we got
Okay.
into this. So in like the Hakuna Matata
Yeah,
fund,
yeah.
so us getting to know our donors allows us to then take things we're hearing out in the community and potentially connect that donor to
Right.
it. So if we know that donors have passions, and we know they're directing where they want their dollars to go with guidance from
Okay.
us. So the more we get to know our donors and their interests, and the more we're hearing things
Right.
out in the community, our role is they may choose not to, give a grant or fund something like that. But one of the opportunities that we're seeing is to get to know our donors and marry them to things that are happening in our community
Okay.
that might be of interest to them.
Okay.
So that's how that works. So now back, so this other question,
About legacy.
yeah, so
versus,
it's it's yes and yes.
okay.
So let me answer that. So for instance, those 45 new funds, almost half of those were legacy funds, where they've left us a gift, but at their passing.
Right. And you don't
And-
know that they left.
And we
the
don't
gift.
know how much that is, or well, we do know.
Oh.
So we do know. So we've sat down with you and your family, and you've said, you
And
know what,
and
I'm
a lot
gonna.
of them come from also from people's talks and conversations with their financial advisors
but-
and planners. But
yes, so-
but it's in there that they want to
Yeah, so that's a whole nother.
Right, that's a whole nother.
But
Yeah.
so yeah, without going too much into the weeds, most of our funds and families come to us through their financial advisor,
Right.
and that doesn't mean their stockbroker. It could, but it's whoever is overseeing their estate. It's a combination of
Right.
people typically, and so Allison and her team spend a fair amount of time with the financial advising community.
Right.
And we call it the professional advising community, because that's estate attorneys, that's your CPA, that might be your money manager, it might be any number of people who are advising you and your family
Okay.
around finances. So in the sense that, so to answer your question about immediate giving, that is a conversation we are having with people to say, why don't you do some of this giving while you're alive so that you can enjoy experience the
Right.
joy of your dollars being at work in our community and see that, as opposed to waiting until you're passing when you'll never see any of
Right.
that. So there's that conversation that's
Okay.
going on. Why a legacy is so important is that's a personal thing, but for a lot of families, like my own, we were talking about my hometown. My grandfather moved to my hometown in 1921. He was the second.
And the name of it again
It's
is
Sheridan,
Sheridan,
Indiana.
Okay.
And so the Little family has been in that community since 1920 and is still in that community.
Okay.
And so, so we're having conversations about what could we do in terms of something to help where we've all grown up and where my sister still has a
Right.
family and my mother is still there. So when you look at Allen County and the history and the families that are all still
yeah.
here as part of Allen County, that legacy is incredibly important. And so that's a piece that Allison and her team spend a considerable amount of time talking to families. And you know what the biggest challenge right now, Sarah, is working with the matriarch and the patriarch and working with them on how to hand that off to the next generation. And
Right.
now we're into 3 generations, right? So we're into our grandparents, our parents, and now our kids.
Right.
And so having that conversation, and so for instance, asking the question when we're in a room with some donors, how many of you have 529 plans? A lot of them raise the college savings plan.
Yes, right.
How many of you have shared that with your children, that they have a 529
right.
plan?
Right.
And everyone, like, some have, some have. Oh, okay, so we're curious. Why have you chosen as a family to share with your kids that they have a 529 plan to help them go? And why have you chosen not to tell, right? And you have this, so there's all these interesting conversations and feelings around wealth.
Oh, well, and money. I mean,
money,
that's a whole
period.
Yeah,
and so
yeah.
I think the legacy piece is part of that complicated conversation.
Sure.
To say, what does our legacy as a family look like in the community, and how can we perpetuate that?
Right.
And if you're interested in having that conversation, we are here to help facilitate
And
that.
then also you talked about going from like the matriarch and patriarch to the next generation stuff, but I'm wondering also how that impacts, because millennials now, who are going to be the next up and coming donors and philanthropists, they are not as keen to give money to larger entities like community foundations, or even to large programs like American Red Cross or the United Way. They really want to give to the boots on the ground organizations.
Yeah.
And they don't want to give to organizations that for every dollar you give, 90% of it goes to administration. So how has that impacted? And because, you talk about all these great people on your team, but then I start thinking, okay, well, there's salaries and, and how does
Right.
that take away from the amount that you could maybe give in grants or invest or programs? So where do you see that shift happening for you?
Well, I think that's a great question, and one that is not going to be solved at this coffee session. Well, I think there's always been this gradual maturation of an individual and now today is the click and give. I'm walking on the trail. Hey, if you like this experience, click here and give $5
And
to
also
the
like
trails.
all the Kickstarter and
and all-
GoFundMe
and
that
all of those
anybody can
things.
start for anybody.
And so where community foundations right now really live is that further along in the maturation of an individual who has a few more years under their belt and has more thought about what they want their charitable dollars to look like. And again, we're not for everybody, right? And so for us,
you may get the millennials when they
later,
a little
downstream,
bit later.
when they've
but
really
that's important. I mean, we can't most organizations, they don't know who they are and they don't know who they're for. And so I think owning your space and where you are makes you that much more successful and impactful, because not to say that you don't expand your lane, but your lane that you're in.
Yeah. And yes, and we need to own that and be comfortable in that space, because back to your point, we have limited resources to pay staff and how big or small we want to be. And what we don't want to get ourselves into is this situation where we're stretched so thin that we're putting our brand at risk, we're putting our reputation at risk by not being able to do the things that we say we can do. So if I had $5 for every family I've sat down with and said, you know what, you just need to keep doing what you're doing, we're not a part of that conversation yet, I could open my fund. Because a lot of times we'll say, well, I give to my university, we give to our local faith-based whatever, we also, cancer's important to us because we've lost our, you know what, you don't need, back to at the very beginning, you don't need the community foundation to make those checks and make those contributions for you. However, when you're ready to have a bigger conversation about your family's legacy, about your charitable giving, and let's be honest, a lot of what happens is a result of some sort of financial event in their life, whether that be selling of a business, the passing of a loved one who suddenly left you money, you know, all sorts of events like that.
Which is partly why the financial plans. I mean, I always say when I talk to some organizations that are going to look to get significant funding from a company, okay. So I always say, top line, there's the feel good, they want to make a difference, they are going to give you that money. But the next part of your ask for this amount of money, in some way, you've got to show how it benefits them because they are a business. So either you've got to show that this is going to help open your door to a new target audience, or you know, whatever it is. But you have to also recognize that they are a business, and so they're, you know, they've designated a certain amount, but you've got to, it has to be both, and that's not to diminish their philanthropic initiatives and endeavors, but the reality of it is that you do also have to think about.
Yeah, that's why. No, great point. And that's why it is fun to play those what if games, you know, when you're sitting around the family at the kitchen table, like, what if we won the lottery tomorrow? Those games are healthy because when, you know, if good fortune comes your way, you've at least had some thought. Well, they say
to put it out in the universe also helps you.
Yeah, and so to have those conversations are healthy, and to say, because then when that moment does happen, whatever that event is, that you've at least laid out some thought about, okay, what would we do, you know, and how would we, which is why so many lottery winners are now bankrupt, right? And,
well, the first thing the first thing you get a financial planner, but
so I think, and your point's well taken, that's one of the roles we try to play, is that more thoughtful approach to your giving.
And it doesn't diminish it by making it strategic.
No, not at
so
all.
In line with your asking the what if question, I also thought what was very interesting. So I know that you've spent the last 2 years really in a meaningful intent with your board and your staff to create your vision and strategic plan going forward.
Yes.
And so you started with this idea of asking the question, why? So tell me a little bit about why, and what that led you all at the Community Foundation to sort of come to.
No, that's great. So 9 months into my first year, it honestly didn't take me 9 months to realize that there was just some lack of clarity amongst the board and the lack of staff of why am I on this board? Why do we do what we do? And because of all the complex moving parts, most of our board members had come to be on the board for all sorts of different reasons. And so, and a plug to Simon Sinek, and a plug to our firm that we use out of South Bend, Cressy Consulting, we had them come in, and for the first time in, from what I understand, decades, we had the board and staff spend an entire afternoon talking about the power of why and understanding our why statement. Why are we involved in the Community Foundation? Whether that be professionally as a staff or as a volunteer. And that was just a real bonding moment for all of us, and an eye-opening moment for all of us. And that's where we came up with the tagline that you've seen us use, because we love our community. Ultimately, it came down to, and Simon talks about it, make it simple. Why are we all here? We're all here because we love Fort Wayne, we love Allen County. We all have different reasons why we love the county, but that's it, that we love our community. And so that, again, that was in September of 2018. That led to then this discussion about, okay, well now that we know that and why we're all here, then how can we be more proactive in that approach as opposed to being reactive? Which has, as I mentioned, historically been the role of community foundations, is to let things happen to us instead of us going out. So then that allowed me to then go out and use all of 2019 to just meet with people, engage in community conversations, meet our grantees, meet our donors. At the same time, we started convening the board in retreats. We did 3 of them in 2019 on typically Friday afternoons. And we slowly crafted this plan, but that was based on 300 interviews that Allison and I had. We did 2 days of focus group work with 100 people, and that's where we came up with this mantra underneath, because we love our community, was we want to connect people to resources to build a more vibrant
so you
community.
Came up with what I would say is not only you understand now who and what you do, and now you're going to add the how. We're going to do it. So you came up with, your focus is connected community, really on equity, inspiring places, which would be the neighborhoods in downtown, the Everyone's Economy,
Yep.
the Lifelong Learning, and Healthy Mind and Body. And so under those, you've now then identified your strategic goals.
Right.
And then there's this Fort Wayne Forward initiative.
Yeah, and that was an initiative put together 2.5 years ago that was in response to J.P. Morgan Chase's National Advancing Cities Initiative,
Okay.
which has now gone away. That was supposed to be a 5-year program. They announced the first year, and so it was a great collaboration, to be honest, Sarah, that had me and the Community Foundation,
Right.
United Way, the city,
Okay.
Greater Fort Wayne Inc., and several organizations as a steering committee, and great collaboration. We submitted an application, it didn't advance, and then J.P. Morgan pulled the plug
Right.
on that particular initiative.
I thought that also, I mean, it's a great way, I thought, to sort of put the umbrella over several of your new initiatives and programs.
Yeah.
So that you have, and so
Well, it led to great conversations,
Right.
and it led to, I remember sitting in one of our meetings where we had one organization sharing what they're doing and another organization sitting right next to them, and we'll keep this all anonymous,
No.
and the one saying, I didn't know you were
Well,
doing that,
okay.
and the other organization saying, we've been trying to meet with you for
Right.
the last 10
All
years
right, all
to
right.
share this
but
with
let's
you.
also take a little detour before
Yeah.
I talk to you about these new initiatives. I feel like sometimes there are too many nonprofits, and in the sense that so many of them, they have the same objective. Maybe they're doing kids at risk, okay? And so maybe one has an after-school program and one does a weekend program. So their idea of how to treat or handle the issues of at-risk kids is different. But they're both covering the same sort of focus.
Yeah.
So isn't there, I mean, I just feel like, and sometimes I feel like someone creates their own nonprofit because they just don't like something. But is that a role, or maybe that, or do you think that you sort of say to people, or, okay, so you know that you're doing the same, and if you came together, because again, that's sort of that community foundation of, you take a lot of $10,000 and you put them together, you get a lot more.
Yeah, well, in spirit, that is
No.
a great idea.
Right.
And the practicality of that is what you hinted at. There are personalities involved, there are passions
Right.
involved, so yes, you are correct. There are a lot of not-for-profits in our community doing great work. And most of them are nuanced just enough to make them different from what the other is doing. So what our role in that, and along with a few other partners, Follinger Foundation, to name one, and a couple of others, we do take, when the opportunity presents itself, we do take advantage of that and try to get organizations together that are doing like work or very similar work, and just have a conversation about what, synergies, synergistic.
Right, or do you think that based on these focus areas, like, again, I also sort of feel like the Community Foundation, because you are in a sense this gathering and clearinghouse and a way to, a lot of what's going on, it's also, you could be the resource. So like under Connected Community, like you list all of the nonprofits that this is their mission and what they do. So even if somebody thinks about, like, has an idea, like the people, I'm going to use the people with the calculators, and that really came from them being in a store and seeing parents trying to buy these $100 calculators.
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
and then they think, oh, we should start something. And it's not saying that they're naive, but they may not realize that there already is. So I just think, like, wouldn't it be great? So all the entrepreneur programs,
Yeah.
because there is no, and so taking these, and then you could show what the nonprofit is, what it is, what it does, and then, or even the ones you work with in a sense, and what funds you have that if they want to be on it, but sort of giving that so that then the people don't just start. Because also, I mean, I've been doing research to start a nonprofit. It's very expensive. I mean,
Yeah, right.
it's not like you can just easily.
Well, I would say that's the main area of focus for Christine under, as our Vice President of Nonprofit Excellence, is how do we make those resources available, fielding those calls and putting each other in touch with those commonalities and topics and areas of interest. And that's our role. That's what
Right.
we're trying to do and
Right.
get better at. And so I don't disagree with anything you've
Yeah.
said. It's
I mean, it's sort
so-
of broadening out what I sort of would feel the role, like that boots on the ground of how the community foundation could be more of a clearinghouse for not only resources, but information.
Yeah, and I would say a lot of that we have to keep close to the vest is probably not the right description, but some of that is back to being confidential or
No,
not
but I'm
wanting.
just talking about, like, different organizations that are out there that are known
Yeah, oh, sure.
entities.
Yeah.
But I'm also very interested. So
So I would say if any of your listeners or watchers
Okay.
of this program have a thought about, I'm really passionate about whatever that is,
Right.
call Christine.
Right,
and
or
have a
it really
conversation.
makes sense also to talk to you, because instead of taking, let's say they have $50,000 and they say, okay, so we'll start a nonprofit. Well, 20,000 of that's going to go to the legal fees and the structure fees and whatever to set it
Right.
up. So maybe if they come to you at the community foundation and you could really get them to invest all of that 50,000 into some program or an initiative that
Yes.
you're working with or you've done, because you also not only give grants, you also are very involved in creating your own programs and funds, right?
Yes,
I mean, I
although
don't-
we don't run the programs, or
No, but
traditionally
like
don't
for
run the
instance,
programs.
you have the Innovation and Neighborhood Renewal Fund,
Yes,
right?
right.
So these are like what you talk about when you have the discretion, right? So
Right.
these are things that you are started. So like your
Right.
Children's Health Collaborative,
Yes,
or the newest one, the Women and Girls. Well, you started with a study,
yes.
and now you actually have created a fund.
Mhm.
And I have insider information that I know the raising of those funds is going very well.
Yes, it is.
For those women, and then you are using the results of the study, then you will implement those funds. But it was really also, that came from either the board or somebody in the community foundation saying, we haven't done a study about women and girls in 40
Right.
years, and then saying, okay, we're going to invest to do this study, or you go out and get a grant to do the study,
Right.
and then your board, and based on that, says we want to create this fund, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay. And so
And to your point about not wanting to reinvent the wheel or
Right.
create an organization that does that, so where we look for opportunities are these gaps. Where are the gaps? And there are, as the research showed, there are many organizations serving women and girls.
Right.
However, there was this gap between the last study done back in the 70s and where we are today,
Right.
and that's where we felt the Women's Fund could fill that void.
And along those lines, like you've identified employment, personal safety, caretaking, but not only do you think that the role, and again, this may be evolving for the Community Foundation, is when you create this fund, maybe also not only is it to give services and programs or reach out to existing organizations, but do you think that there is a role then also for this fund for advocacy? Because the reality of it is, white women pay 83 cents to the dollar of men. African American women make 67 cents. Brown women make 53 cents. I mean, the cost of childcare. Just the fact that, like, in our legislature right now, there is a law that they're trying to pass that would allow more equitable accommodations for pregnant women. Women have been the most impacted by COVID. So as part of what this fund does, it's great that you're going to create programs and for education and employment, but if we don't equal, there's equity about the playing field, or the fact that people are spending a quarter to a third of their take-home pay on childcare.
Right.
So is that part of it?
Well, the
or-
short answer is yes. Advocacy is
Okay.
a key component of the Women's Fund's initiatives. And what that looks like is evolving as
Right,
you
you're in the
mentioned. And
process
so
right now
we're-
of doing that.
yes.
But I just wondered, because
Yeah.
that would not be a traditional.
So I know you've got Irene Walters, who's a board
Yes,
member and
yes,
current chair of the
yes,
steering
yes.
committee, and Allison Gerardo,
Right,
who's
they're going to be.
they're coming on later,
Yes.
yeah, so
and I'm going
they'll-
to address this with them. But
yeah.
I was just asking from
Yeah.
the standpoint of you, sort of in your why, and in your, because sometimes I feel like you can't, just like we talked about charity versus philanthropy. I think that when you also look at philanthropy and you look at the long term, like why someone is hungry, and you also have to look at, in order to get them the parity, we also have to look at some realities of laws in our state,
Sure.
in the country, and also some of the biases. I know that you've looked a lot at looking at diversity and inclusivity. I mean, and the fact that Black African American women and brown women make significantly less than even white women. So, I mean, I think that it's also maybe reconsidering that has to become part of what you do with these organizations and entities that you create.
that'll be a great topic for Irene
You'll get
and
to come back.
Allison.
Yes,
yeah,
yeah.
yes, absolutely.
So I wanted to end on a lighter note with you.
Yeah, sure.
And
That was a little heavy right there. at the
yeah,
end. That's okay.
So, but do you know that you have a lot in common with Tom Hanks?
I'm learning that. Yes.
Okay. So you both collect typewriters.
Yes.
So, and you collect both electric and manual, right?
Yes.
And how many do you currently have?
I have six manual now, and one
Okay.
electric, which is the Selectric
And
one.
rumor has it that you actually use one in your office?
I do. I have an Underwood 319 in my office that I type thank you notes with, or
Yeah, but what do you
those
do
kinds
when
of
you
things.
like when you type on the computer and you make it? You just delete. I mean, there you got. Do you still? You don't have to use the Selectric. Remember that was the first one that
Had
came out
correctable.
had the correctable
Yes.
ribbon. When
So
I
no,
learned to
on
type,
the manuals,
you had to put
you still have to do that. Yes.
you have to get the. Can you still find like the corrector tape? And,
Oh yeah, and liquid. So you got
liquid
liquid
paper,
paper is
right?
still there. Now you've got the kind that comes in the roll. You know,
Yes, the tape,
The
yep,
tape. Yeah. So and you still have the kind you can drop in there and hit.
right. Yeah.
So the key is just go slow and don't have those mistakes.
Right.
The tougher challenge is actually finding replacement ribbons.
Yeah. And
That's the
and
challenge.
What is it about typewriters? Because we were talking before about your interest in journalism and words.
Yes. So my dad, growing up, he wrote a column we were talking about my hometown newspaper, and my dad wrote a column there, and I don't know, I embedded in my memory as hearing him pecking away. And then in college, I had to use a manual typewriter. So
Yes.
I remember they all, in my fraternity house, we'd set up all these tables in the front
Right.
room during finals week, and we're all up cranking out. And I think that has just been something that has, I don't know why, it just stuck with me, and then drives my wife crazy because what do we do with all of these?
Right.
And,
Well,
but,
that's what
so
Tom
I've got
Hanks,
them, a lot
he's
of them in
sort
storage right now.
But I like the idea
yeah.
of what you said about slowing down, because there is an element like when we so quickly send off an email or we don't think
Yeah.
about it. But when you are sort of typing, you have to think about it. Or, when you write it longhand and then you type it.
Yeah.
And I like that idea that it does make you a little more thoughtful. Plus, I'm impressed that you're someone who, handwritten or typed, you still send thank you notes.
Yes,
So
I do. I'd
that's
send
very-
both. I still send both.
yeah, I always do handwritten
Yeah.
thank yous. So
And Sarah, it does slow you down. It really
well, it makes you think about it.
forces you to think
yeah.
about what you want to say.
Yeah, but like when I
And,
learned to type in 7th grade, all the keys were painted over. So I don't, like if you said to me, where's an S? I have to do it for you because that's how I learned to type. You had to
Right.
learn to do it by feel.
Well,
not
and
by,
so now we're really going to go.
Yeah.
So back in the day, I grew up on Lotus 1-2-3 instead of Excel, and so I learned all the keystrokes instead of the click and point. And so
Right.
now even in Excel, I just do
right.
that because that's
and
the
the
habit.
funny thing is when I learned to type, they didn't paint over the numbers, so I still don't know the fingering keys
Oh,
for the
right,
numbers.
yeah.
I would cheat there.
Yeah.
So, but I like that you said it slows you down and maybe it helps you to think and be a little more thoughtful and
Yeah.
intentional. I think is a
Well,
good.
and the beauty of thank you cards is thank you cards are smaller,
Right.
and so you really have to think about, all right, what do I want to say in this
Right.
limited space that's meaningful to whomever I'm writing
Right.
that note to, and thanking them for whatever it is they've done.
And then they also
But,
say, like Emily posted, Oprah and President, you'd only write on the front side.
Correct.
Because in case someone wants to frame it or something. So you really have a limited
Yes.
amount.
Yeah.
So,
right.
but I like that you said that it makes you more thoughtful. So now I'm going to ask you to be a little more thoughtful.
Yeah.
At the end of each And Good Company program, I ask guests the same 12 questions that French novelist Marcel Proust popularized from a Victorian parlor game. So,
12 questions?
well, there's actually like 42, but
Okay.
I'm only giving you 12.
Okay, 12.
So,
All right.
what is your favorite word?
Perhaps.
What is your least favorite word?
Can't.
What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
My belief there's a God.
What turns you off creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Negative people.
What sound or noise do you love? Maybe it's the keys.
What sound do I love? Gosh, this sounds corny. I love the voice of my wife and my kids. I love their voices.
What sound or noise do you hate?
Wow. I hate the sound of anger.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
I'd love to be a charter fisherman.
What profession would you not like to do?
You know, coal mining. I don't know how they do it. To be
I know.
honest,
I don't know about
really
being
don't
under.
know how they do that.
And they go far down.
Yeah, like way down. I'd say top of the mine, coal mining.
Okay. What do you consider your greatest achievement?
My greatest achievement so far is my 5 children being healthy and navigating life so far, knock on wood.
Who, living or dead, would you most like to have a conversation with?
Oh, gosh. You know, I would, I'm not going to say Jesus or God.
That's okay.
Yeah. So one
Chuck
of my,
Surek said Jesus. Was
yeah.
nice,
So I mean, that'd be an amazing
Okay.
conversation.
Who
But
would be
let's
number
put that
2?
aside. I am I hate to say this, Ayn Rand has been a
Oh, yes.
fascinating author of mine. And
She's the author of Atlas Shrugged,
Atlas Shrugged,
Fountainhead.
Fountainhead, and those sort. I just think her thinking, and she's an atheist. I'm a Christian, and so anyway, her writing
Okay.
has always fascinated me.
Okay.
I'd love to have a conversation with her
And how would you like to die?
peacefully in my sleep.
Okay. And if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Job well done, my faithful servant
That seems to be the
and son. Yeah.
But I told you I had Sheila Curry Campbell, and hers was come up a little higher. I thought that was great. Like,
Well, I think job well done applies to anything. We want to hear that from our parents. We want to
Yes.
hear that from our coworkers.
Yes.
We want to hear that from people that are important to us.
Yeah.
I think that's
Yeah.
not just a higher being.
Yeah. Well, I hope that you'll come back and continue that.
Yeah, I
we
would
can
love to.
come
This
back
has been
because
great.
also, I mean, we haven't really touched a lot about all of these different
Yeah.
initiatives and programs, and I am looking forward to talking to other of your staff members and
Yeah.
Lorene and Allison.
Well, thank
So-
you for
well,
having me.
thank
This
you.
has been great. Thanks,
Great.
Sarah.
You can learn more about Ann Good Company and all the other great conversations we have had at anngoodcompany.info. We look forward to next week when we invite you to enjoy a seat at the table for great conversation and good company.